The war room was alive with tension, though no one dared speak above the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft tapping of keyboards. Admiral Jonathan Hale stood at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, his hands gripping the edges with white-knuckled intensity. The air smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic, a sterile aroma that did little to calm his nerves. Today, the stakes were higher than they had been in years. Intelligence reports had trickled in over the past 48 hours about escalating threats in the Pacific Theater, and the possibility of a covert attack had the military on edge. Hale's normally composed face was etched with lines of stress, his piercing blue eyes scanning each briefing folder as if the truth would reveal itself faster if he stared hard enough. A young officer stepped forward, her uniform immaculate, every insignia perfectly aligned. She moved with the fluidity of someone trained for precision, her posture rigid yet natural, unshakable. She held a sealed classified folder, the edges pristine, as though it had never been touched. "Admiral Hale," she said softly, her voice calm but firm, "I have the updated intelligence brief you requested." Hale's eyes flicked to her, frustration bubbling beneath his skin. It had been a long morning of conflicting reports and indecipherable charts. "Finally," he muttered. He reached for the folder. In a moment of sharp irritation at the pace, he slammed it onto the table, and in that instant his hand collided with her wrist. The room fell silent. The soft echo of impact seemed to resonate in Hale's chest longer than it should have. The officer's wrist bent slightly under the pressure, but she did not flinch otherwise. She didn't cry out. She didn't jerk back. She merely lifted her head just enough to meet Hale's eyes, calm, measured, and entirely unreadable. Hale froze mid-motion, realization dawning too late. Was that a reflex? He wondered. But the officer said nothing, only set the folder down in front of him with unshakable poise. The room remained eerily quiet, his staff exchanging brief, subtle glances. Whispers threatened to break through, but no one dared speak. I apologize," Hale stammered, instantly regretting the gesture. It was uncharacteristic of him to lose his temper in the war room, especially in front of junior officers. He straightened, attempting to regain his composure, but the sense of unease lingered. The officer gave a faint nod, acknowledging his words without any visible emotion. Then she turned sharply and walked away, leaving Hale staring at the empty space she had occupied. As the door clicked closed behind her, Hale's aides exchanged uneasy looks. Some knew who she was, or at least suspected, but no one dared tell the Admiral. The war room had rules, and certain truths were layered behind clearance levels even Hale did not possess. He felt a subtle shift in the energy of the room, as if a silent alarm had been triggered, an invisible boundary he had unknowingly crossed. Hale sank into the chair at the head of the table, exhaling heavily. He replayed the incident over and over, mentally analyzing every detail. Why didn't she react? Why didn't anyone intervene? The officer's poise was unsettling. She moved through the room as though the chaos surrounding her didn't exist, immune to the pressure that suffocated everyone else. The staff continued the briefing, discussing troop deployments and reconnaissance reports, but Hale's mind drifted. Every time he looked up, he half expected to see the officer watching him from some shadowed corner, silently judging his every move. The thought gnawed at him. Normally, he commanded the room, the officers, the operations with authority and unquestioned respect. But this encounter had changed something, some subtle yet profound imbalance. Later that afternoon, Hale attempted to speak with one of his aides about the incident, to understand who the officer truly was. "I need to know who that was," he demanded quietly, leaning close. "She carries herself differently. There's something about her." The aide shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, that's Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross," he said cautiously. "She's a specialized operative. Her assignments are classified. You weren't supposed to see her today." Hale froze. A specialized. His mind raced. He had heard whispers of elite operatives within the Navy, but their existence was often veiled, cloaked in secrecy. He had never imagined one would appear in his war room delivering intelligence directly. "She's a Navy SEAL," the aide admitted, lowering his voice. "Tier 1, extremely confidential. Most of us wouldn't even know she exists." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Hale absorbed the revelation. He had struck a Navy SEAL, one of America's most lethal, highly trained covert operatives, and he had done it in a moment of anger, with no thought to the consequences. A shiver ran down his spine. Suddenly, the quiet demeanor of the officer made sense. Her lack of reaction was not passivity. It was discipline honed over countless missions, a mastery of self-control forged in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. She had endured situations Hale couldn't begin to comprehend: hostile extractions, deep-cover reconnaissance, operations where a single misstep meant death. And he had dared strike her. Hale's pride collided with guilt, a rare combination that left him reeling. He had always commanded respect, demanded obedience, and maintained a reputation as one of the Navy's most decisive leaders. And yet, for the first time in decades, he felt insignificant. He had underestimated her completely. Through the rest of the day, Hale found himself distracted, replaying the incident in his mind. Each movement she had made, every small gesture, seemed loaded with meaning he couldn't fully grasp. The war room briefing continued, but he felt detached, an observer in his own command. His staff noticed. Subtle nods, wary glances, even the cautious tone of a subordinate's voice reminded him something extraordinary had entered his domain, and he had nearly provoked disaster by failing to recognize it. That evening, after the war room had emptied, Hale lingered, staring at the spot where she had stood. The intensity of her presence lingered like a faint echo, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. No one had scolded him. No one had intervened. The officer had remained silent, unshaken, untouchable. And Hale knew that the next time he crossed paths with her, there could be consequences far beyond embarrassment. Unknown to Hale, the officer, Arya Cross, had filed a silent report. It wasn't a complaint. She noted the Admiral's acute stress response, the misjudgment under pressure, and the potential implications for operational security. Her notation was precise, unemotional, professional. To her, it was routine, just another entry in a life measured in calculated precision and disciplined restraint. Hale left the war room that evening more aware than ever of his limitations, and for the first time, he wondered what it meant to truly respect someone who operated in shadows he could not see. He didn't yet know that Arya Cross's presence would change everything in ways he could never imagine. The seed of tension had been planted, and the war room, the Admiral, and the officer were all on paths that would converge again under circumstances far more dangerous than any briefing could contain. And Hale, who had spent decades commanding men in the open, would soon discover that some battles were fought in silence, and some warriors were invisible until it was too late to underestimate them. Admiral Hale could not shake the image of the officer from his mind. Her calm, measured movements replayed in his head like a sequence he could not decode. Every detail was precise: the subtle tilt of her head, the way she carried the folder, the deliberate calm in her posture. It was almost as if she had anticipated his outburst, had predicted his momentary lapse in composure. For someone so young, or at least appearing young, she exuded an authority that made him, the Admiral of the Navy, feel uncomfortably small. That evening, Hale attempted to make sense of the incident. In the quiet solitude of his office, he rifled through personnel records and internal communications. Nothing matched the officer's description. Her name did not appear on any roster accessible to him. His heart thumped. How could someone with such clearance, such skill, operate in the war room without my knowledge? The thought gnawed at him. He had spent decades climbing the military hierarchy, mastering chain of command and protocol, and yet here was someone who existed entirely outside it. Hale called one of his aides into the office, leaning over the polished mahogany desk as he spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Tell me everything you know about Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross," he demanded, eyes narrowing. "And I want it straight, no exaggeration." The aide hesitated, glancing at the floor. Sir, she's not exactly, well, she's a Tier 1 SEAL. Operational security is extremely high. Most of what we know is classified beyond your current clearance. Hale's brow furrowed. Tier 1 SEAL, he repeated, his voice tense. You're saying she's what exactly? She's one of the Navy's most covert operatives, sir. Special assignments, deep cover reconnaissance, hostage recovery, intelligence gathering. Very few people have direct knowledge of her operations. We're not supposed to discuss her openly. Hale leaned back in his chair, mind racing. He had struck a Navy SEAL, a soldier whose very existence was a guarded secret. The gravity of his mistake began to sink in. This was not merely a lapse in judgment. It was a transgression with consequences he could not yet predict. For the next several hours, Hale attempted to track her movements through internal logs and communications, but every trail was blocked, redacted, or deliberately misleading. It was as if she did not exist within the Navy's bureaucratic system at all. Every digital fingerprint led to a dead end. Every file bore the mark of extreme classification. The deeper he searched, the more he realized the enormity of what had occurred. He had nearly provoked one of the deadliest, most precise operators in the world, and he had no idea how to gauge her response, or if he should even attempt to. Meanwhile, the war room continued to operate as though nothing had happened. Officers briefed troop movements, satellite data, and intelligence reports on emerging threats in the Pacific. Yet Hale's mind was elsewhere. Every glance toward the empty seat where she had stood reminded him of her presence. The silence she left behind was not absence, it was awareness, a reminder that she existed on a level beyond his understanding. He could feel her observing him, even when she wasn't there, and the thought unsettled him profoundly. That night, unable to sleep, Hale walked the corridors of the Pentagon, replaying the incident over and over. The war room lights cast long shadows on the walls, and the quiet hum of air conditioning seemed louder than normal. He imagined her movements, the way she could move through enemy territory undetected, how she could neutralize threats with precision and silence. The reality hit him. He had faced men in combat whose training and skill he respected, but none of them had ever operated in the kind of invisible, lethal realm that she inhabited. She was untouchable, not because of arrogance, but because of mastery. A flash of memory returned, her wrist bending slightly under his hand, yet no sign of pain, no reaction. That single gesture spoke volumes: restraint, control, discipline. She was trained to endure the unimaginable without letting it show. Hale realized that if he had struck her anywhere else, in any other context, it could have provoked a response far beyond his understanding, a response that could have cost him dearly. Early the next morning, Hale attempted another discreet inquiry. He approached a deputy familiar with intelligence operations, hoping for some clarification. The deputy's eyes flickered, a mixture of caution and respect evident in his gaze. Sir, he began carefully, Lieutenant Commander Cross is exceptional. Her missions are top secret. She operates outside the standard command structure for a reason. You've encountered someone who doesn't fit the rules you're used to. That's deliberate. Hale's jaw tightened. He understood the implication. She existed in a space where even admirals had to step lightly, where protocol and hierarchy could not dictate interactions. She was part of a world hidden beneath layers of security, a realm where precision and silence mattered more than rank or authority, and he had just violated that space. The following day, Hale observed subtle shifts in war room behavior. Officers who had once spoken freely now hesitated when he entered the room. Whispers traveled just beyond his hearing, and he sensed an unspoken consensus. Someone extraordinary had passed through their midst, and they were collectively unsure how to react. Hale felt a creeping sense of vulnerability. For the first time in decades, he was not the most capable person in the room. Meanwhile, the officer herself remained a mystery. She delivered reports with calm efficiency, disappeared into secure corridors without fanfare, and never addressed the incident. Hale wanted to apologize, to make amends, but he didn't even know how to approach someone whose life existed partly in shadows. Every attempt he made to engage her was met with the same composed silence, a quiet reminder that he had underestimated her. Later that week, Hale was briefed on escalating tensions in the Pacific Theater. Enemy movements suggested a potential covert operation targeting a U.S. submarine fleet. As he absorbed the intelligence, a strange thought crossed his mind. What if she were involved in the operation? The very idea made him uneasy. He had almost struck her in a fit of frustration, and now the stakes had grown exponentially. He realized something crucial. Respect was not a matter of rank but understanding. Some warriors operated in dimensions beyond recognition, and underestimating them could be fatal. He had glimpsed that today, and it had shaken him to his core. Every instinct, every lesson learned over decades of service, seemed suddenly insufficient. By Friday, Hale's unease had transformed into a quiet obsession. He studied her movements, tried to glean patterns from her behavior, and even reviewed security footage of the war room from earlier in the week. Each frame reinforced the truth he was struggling to accept. This was not a routine officer. She was someone who could operate in silence, strike decisively, and emerge unscathed, invisible until her presence was necessary. Hale's respect, and his fear, grew with every observation. As he left the Pentagon that evening, Hale walked slowly through the empty halls, recalling the incident in vivid detail. The impact, the calm resilience, the controlled precision, it all replayed like a silent lesson. He understood finally that he had encountered someone extraordinary, someone whose capabilities and discipline transcended the normal bounds of command and protocol. And he knew, deep in his gut, that this encounter was only the beginning. Admiral Jonathan Hale, one of the Navy's most decorated leaders, had made a single, brief misjudgment. Yet the consequences of that moment stretched far beyond a mere bruise or a fleeting embarrassment. He had glimpsed a force operating in secrecy, a shadow moving within the heart of the Pentagon, and it had changed his perspective on leadership, respect, and the unseen battles that shaped the safety of an entire nation. He didn't yet know her name. He didn't yet know her missions. But one thing was certain. He would never underestimate the quiet officer who moved through his war room with calm, lethal precision. And he would soon have to face her again, under circumstances that would test his judgment, his authority, and the very limits of his courage. The Pentagon's corridors were quiet in the late hours of the evening, save for the faint hum of air circulation and the distant clatter of night shift personnel. Admiral Jonathan Hale, unable to shake the tension from the previous week, wandered the halls, replaying the war room incident over and over. Every detail about the young officer haunted him, the way she had stood, perfectly composed, when he struck her wrist, the calm in her eyes that betrayed nothing. He could still feel the echo of that brief impact, a reminder that he had underestimated someone extraordinary. He paused near a restricted operations wing, one of the few areas even he rarely entered. And there, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her again. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross moved with silent, precise steps, navigating the hallway as though it were a battlefield rather than a high-security Pentagon corridor. Her movements were fluid, deliberate, and unhurried, yet she carried the unmistakable air of someone who could neutralize threats with lethal efficiency. She was alone, yet Hale felt an inexplicable tension, as if the very air around her recognized the power she held. Their eyes met briefly. Hale wanted to step forward to apologize or speak, but something in her gaze froze him. It was neither hostile nor welcoming. It was merely awareness, a measure of him against her, an evaluation he had no hope of controlling. She continued past him without breaking stride, disappearing into the restricted wing with the grace of someone accustomed to operating unseen. Hale stood rooted, mind racing. She is not just an officer, she is something else entirely. The realization settled over him with a weight he could not dismiss. For all his years of command, for all his experience in crises, he had encountered few individuals capable of inhabiting such a space, between visibility and secrecy, authority and autonomy. She moved in a realm he had only glimpsed from afar, and he had been foolish enough to treat her as ordinary. In the war room, the incident had left him uneasy. Here, outside the controlled environment of briefings, it became almost unbearable. He remembered the aide's words. "Sir, she's a Tier 1 SEAL, exceptional. She operates outside the normal chain of command for reasons you cannot fully understand." He could now believe it. Every movement, every deliberate pause, every unshakable step he had observed over the last few days confirmed it. She was trained for missions he might never know existed. And yet she had crossed paths with him, silently judging him, and left him to reconsider everything he thought he understood about power, authority, and control. Hale returned to his office but could not focus on his usual routines. He opened secure logs, hopping to find patterns, deployments, anything that might hint at her assignments. Every file was sealed beyond his clearance. Every report was redacted. Every operational note was intentionally vague. It was as if she existed not only outside the normal command structure, but outside the very digital framework Hale relied upon. Even as the Admiral, he felt blind. Late into the night, he sat in the darkened war room, reviewing satellite feeds and operational maps. He imagined her movements, not walking the halls of the Pentagon, but navigating hostile territories, disabling enemies, rescuing hostages, surviving impossible odds. The image of her precision and control was vivid, almost unreal. His imagination, though, was not an exaggeration. Intelligence reports hinted at covert missions she had undertaken overseas. Rumors among a few aides suggested she had been deployed to extract high-value targets in regions where few operatives could survive. And he had struck her, without knowledge, without recognition, without preparation. Hale's unease grew into obsession. He watched shadows, he noted subtle movements, he replayed interactions in his mind. Every time a file was delivered, every time an aide brushed past his desk with a message, he instinctively wondered, could that have been her? Is she already in motion? It was a strange combination of fear and fascination. He wanted to know more, yet he understood that curiosity carried risk. She was not an ordinary officer who could be summoned, questioned, or reprimanded. She was a force that existed beyond most parameters, and he had learned the hard way that even a casual mistake could have far-reaching consequences. Meanwhile, Arya Cross operated with her usual precision. Every action, every report, every movement in the Pentagon was intentional. She knew the war room incident had occurred. She knew the Admiral had lost composure. But she did not react, not with anger, not with complaint, not even with acknowledgement beyond the professional. She filed a silent report, noting his acute stress response and potential operational risks, but the notation was purely professional, devoid of personal emotion. To Arya, this was routine. Merely another observation in a life measured in calculated moves and silent efficiency. Hale could not shake the feeling that she was always aware of him, even when absent. He began noticing subtle signs: folders misplaced and returned, staff clearing rooms as she passed, security checks updated moments after her movements. It was as if she operated in multiple dimensions at once, present and absent, seen and unseen, known and unknown. The weight of her presence was not physical, it was psychological, a persistent reminder of his vulnerability. The next day, Hale observed her from a distance during a routine briefing. She sat at the far end of the table, eyes scanning documents with focus that made even seasoned officers feel sluggish. Every gesture was economical, purposeful. When she spoke, her voice was calm, deliberate, and compelling, not loud, not commanding, but undeniably authoritative. Hale found himself measuring his words against hers, unconsciously recalibrating his tone, his posture, his entire demeanor. He had encountered few officers who could command attention so effortlessly, without demanding it. In his private moments, Hale reflected on the disparity between appearance and reality. Here was an officer who looked unassuming in her standard uniform, but whose skills, awareness, and training surpassed nearly everyone in the room. He realized that true power was not always visible, not always audibly announced, and certainly not always acknowledged. Sometimes the most dangerous, effective, and essential forces operated silently, unseen, unnoticed, until action was required. By the end of the week, Hale's obsession had evolved into something more nuanced: respect. It was grudging at first, born from fear and the humility of near misjudgment, but it grew into admiration, tempered by caution. He began to anticipate her movements, to consider how her presence might affect operations, to understand that leadership was as much about recognizing hidden competence as it was about commanding visible authority. Yet Hale knew he had only glimpsed a fraction of her capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross was more than a mystery. She was a living instrument of precision, discipline, and lethal skill. And while he respected her from afar, he understood that one misstep on his part could have catastrophic consequences, not merely for himself, but for national security. Hale's nights became restless. He found himself returning to the corridors of the Pentagon after hours, wandering the halls in a futile attempt to anticipate her movements. Sometimes he imagined scenarios: her neutralizing an imminent threat, extracting hostages in hostile territory, surviving impossible odds, all with the same calm precision she had displayed in the war room. Every fantasy ended the same way: him witnessing her skill, humbled, awed, and profoundly aware of his own fallibility. And then one evening a shadow flitted past him in the main corridor, quick, silent, deliberate. Hale froze. His heart pounded. It was her. The same Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross, moving through restricted areas as though she owned the building. Their eyes met again, and for a fleeting moment he saw something more than awareness in her gaze: assessment. She had measured him once before. Now she measured him again. The encounter lasted only a heartbeat before she disappeared, leaving Hale once more in the echoing corridor. He realized then that he was not just observing her, he was being observed, and he understood with a mixture of fear and fascination that this silent assessment carried weight. It was a reminder that she was always aware, always prepared, and always in control. Hale could plan, command, or strategize, but she operated in a realm where his authority held no sway. And that knowledge, both humbling and exhilarating, would shape every decision he made moving forward. That night Hale returned to his office, sitting in darkness, staring at the war room maps projected on the wall. He replayed the week in his mind: the wrist strike, her calmness, the silent observation, the corridors, the shadows. He realized that he had encountered not just an officer, but a force, a highly trained, highly disciplined operator whose skills and judgment exceeded any he had known in his career. And he knew, deep in his gut, that the true story of Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross had only begun to unfold. The war room was silent but for the quiet hum of monitors and the occasional rustle of papers. Admiral Hale leaned over the polished table, fingers drumming nervously, as a senior intelligence officer briefed him on a new development. A U.S. submarine had gone missing in the Pacific, somewhere near hostile waters, and intelligence indicated that it may have been compromised by enemy forces. Hale's chest tightened as he absorbed the details. Every scenario he imagined ended in catastrophe if the crew could not be located quickly. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a leaden weight. He glanced at the officers around the table. Each face was grim, the tension thick in the room. Then a quiet voice spoke from the far side of the room. "Sir," said a senior operations officer, "we have someone capable of handling this. Someone with the training and experience to operate where conventional forces cannot." Hale's gaze flicked up, curious but wary. The intelligence officer continued, speaking in tones that carried the gravity of top-secret clearance. "Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross. She is our Tier 1 SEAL, highly classified. Her assignments often fall outside the normal chain of command. She is trained for infiltration, extraction, reconnaissance, and recovery operations. She will lead the mission to locate and extract the submarine and crew." Hale felt a chill. Arya Cross, the same officer he had struck in the war room. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He had struck one of America's most skilled, lethal, and secretive operatives, and now she would be responsible for recovering an entire submarine crew from enemy hands. His chest tightened, guilt and awe colliding in equal measure. He tried to speak, to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. It was too late. The briefing continued, outlining the mission parameters: enemy surveillance, compromised intelligence channels, treacherous waters, and the risk of direct confrontation with hostile forces. Every detail was precise, every scenario meticulously considered. Arya would operate in a space where no one else could. Hale's mind raced as he realized the stakes, not just for the mission, but for the lives of those involved, and for the reputation of the Navy itself. As he absorbed the details, flashbacks of their previous encounters replayed in his mind: the strike in the war room, her silent, unflinching response, the shadowy movements in the restricted corridors. Everything now made sense. Her calm composure, her silence, her precision, these were not quirks of personality but the hallmarks of elite training. He had almost underestimated her, almost committed a mistake that could have had catastrophic consequences. Hale swallowed hard and leaned back in his chair. The reality was undeniable. Arya Cross was no ordinary officer. She was a living instrument of precision, capable of operating in hostile environments where failure meant death. Her skill set was unmatched, her discipline absolute, and she had been in his war room, silently assessing him, evaluating his authority and filing observations that only someone trained for lethal operations could notice. The operations officer continued the briefing, highlighting her previous missions: hostage rescues in hostile territories, covert reconnaissance in regions where even intelligence officers could not tread, operations that had saved countless lives, many of them classified beyond the understanding of even senior admirals. Each story was a testament to her skill, her courage, and her unwavering discipline. Hale could hardly believe the extent of her experience. She had survived scenarios most men would consider fatal, and she had done so with calculated precision. Hale's mind wandered briefly to the war room incident, the strike, the reaction, the silence. He felt a wave of shame. If he had struck her under different circumstances, if she had reacted defensively, the consequences could have been unimaginable. And yet she had remained composed, professional, and observant. She had filed a report noting his stress, but nothing else. No retribution, no anger, no complaint, just observation. The reality of her presence now settled on him with crushing weight. He had encountered someone whose operational effectiveness and strategic acumen exceeded his imagination. She had been observing him, evaluating him, and yet she had allowed him to remain unaware of the depth of her capabilities. The very thought humbled him. The briefing concluded with the operational plan. Arya would deploy immediately with a small SEAL team. Hale would oversee the mission from the war room, coordinating support and monitoring intelligence updates. He would have to trust her judgment entirely, relying on someone whose existence he had only just begun to comprehend. As the officers filed out, Hale remained seated, staring at the map of the Pacific projected on the table. He replayed her image in his mind: the calm in the war room, the silent assessment in the corridors, the unwavering posture, the precise movements. He realized that she had already demonstrated more leadership and resilience than many men in command positions he had served with. And now, the mission ahead would test those abilities in ways no briefing could fully convey. Hale's thoughts drifted to the implications of their prior encounter. He had struck her, a symbolic act, though unintended, but now he understood that she had the skill and discipline to survive any situation, including one he might have inadvertently escalated. His respect, mingled with awe, grew exponentially. He understood that leadership was not simply about rank or authority, but about recognizing the capabilities of those around him, especially those who operated beyond visibility and expectation. He made a quiet vow to himself. He would do everything in his power to support her mission, to provide intelligence and resources, and to ensure that she had the autonomy to act decisively. The mistakes of the past would serve as lessons for the future. He would not underestimate her again, not her skill, her judgment, or her capacity for lethal precision. Hale reviewed the intelligence again, noting key details about the submarine's last known position, enemy surveillance patterns, and potential extraction routes. His eyes lingered on one specific corridor of action where Arya's unique skill set would be critical. If any variable shifted, even slightly, she would need to adapt instantly. And he trusted, finally, that she could. As he closed the briefing notes, a thought struck him. Leadership is as much about humility as it is about command. For decades, Hale had relied on his authority to navigate crises, to command respect, and to execute strategy. But here, in the shadow of someone he had nearly dismissed, he realized that true leadership also meant recognizing the extraordinary, the unseen, and the underestimated. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross embodied all of that. The final detail of the briefing lingered in his mind. She would be operating without direct oversight, in conditions so extreme that few could survive. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him again. Lives, missions, and the fate of an entire submarine crew rested on her skill, judgment, and precision. And she would operate in silence, unseen and unacknowledged, until the moment of action demanded otherwise. Hale rose from his chair, stretching tight muscles stiffened from hours of tension. The war room felt suddenly smaller, more confining. He realized that he had stepped into a narrative far larger than himself, one in which his understanding of command, risk, and skill was challenged at every turn. Arya Cross was more than an officer. She was a symbol of lethal efficiency, discipline, and composure, and she was about to prove it on the most dangerous stage imaginable. He made a final note quietly in his mind. Respect is earned in silence. Some warriors, some heroes, operate in shadows, unseen until action demands their presence. He had glimpsed one of those shadows, and the lesson was indelible. He would follow her lead, support her decisions, and for the first time in years, acknowledge that leadership sometimes required humility before the extraordinary. As Hale left the war room that night, he glanced at the empty space where she had sat. The tension, the mystery, and the quiet authority she carried now commanded his deepest respect. He knew that the coming days would test everyone involved, and that Arya Cross would lead in ways he could scarcely imagine. For the first time, Hale felt a mixture of fear, admiration, and anticipation, an awareness that this officer, whom he had almost underestimated, would define the outcome of a crisis beyond anything he had encountered before. And deep down, he knew that their paths were far from finished. The story of Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross, the Navy SEAL who moved in shadows, had only begun to unfold. Hale's role was clear: support, observe, and learn. The next chapter would test every skill, every decision, and every ounce of courage, both hers and his. The dawn broke gray over the Pacific, the horizon streaked with the pale light of early morning. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross and her small SEAL team boarded the stealth transport vessel, each member moving with silent precision, their equipment checked and double-checked. Hale watched from the war room, the weight of the missing submarine pressing on his chest. He had monitored countless missions before, yet this one felt different, because he knew the operative leading it personally, and he had once underestimated her. Arya stood at the bow of the vessel, scanning the endless water with eyes trained to detect the smallest anomaly. Every movement was economical, deliberate, and controlled, as though her body had been programmed for efficiency. Her team followed her cues without hesitation, their trust absolute. In her mind, the mission parameters ran like a flawless sequence: locate the submarine, neutralize hostile forces, secure the crew, and extract without detection. Back in the war room, Hale reviewed satellite feeds, satellite relay reports, and intelligence intercepts. Every indicator suggested potential ambush points along the submarine's projected path. Enemy patrols, hostile detection systems, and environmental hazards layered the operation with lethal complexity. His fingers tapped nervously on the console, heart hammering. He knew Arya could handle it. He had seen glimpses of her skill, but the knowledge did little to ease the tension coiling in his chest. Hours into the mission, Hale's worst fears materialized. Enemy forces ambushed the team near a rocky outcrop in international waters. Communication lines scrambled. The war room monitors flashed intermittent data before blacking out entirely. Panic flickered in Hale's chest, the kind he had rarely experienced in decades of command. For the first time, he felt powerless. Every decision he made now relied on intuition, contingency plans, and the trust he had only just begun to place in Arya. Arya's mind was a hurricane of calculation and adaptation. She had anticipated contingencies and prepared for environmental and tactical challenges alike. Even as the enemy ambushed them, her team moved seamlessly, neutralizing threats silently, positioning themselves in defensive formations, and countering attacks with lethal precision. Every SEAL under her command relied on her calm, unwavering guidance. She assessed the ambush quickly, noting weaknesses, adjusting tactics, and communicating with precision that left no room for error. Meanwhile, Hale remained glued to the monitors in the war room, coordinating the limited support he could provide. He issued instructions to remote drone units, monitored signals intelligence, and attempted to anticipate enemy movements. Every report that flickered across the screen intensified his anxiety. The reality was brutal. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered in certain sectors, and the success of the operation rested entirely on Arya's skill. Flashbacks haunted Hale's mind, her calm in the war room, her silent glide through Pentagon corridors, the precise poise when he had struck her wrist. The realization hit him with force. He had almost jeopardized this mission by underestimating her earlier. And yet, there she was, orchestrating survival and extraction with a level of mastery Hale could scarcely comprehend. Hours stretched like days. Reports were intermittent, broken by static or missing entirely. Hale's aides attempted to keep him focused, but even they could sense the tension radiating from him. He found himself muttering to himself, replaying every decision, analyzing every potential outcome, knowing that each miscalculation could cost lives. Yet the war room was silent, respectful, aware that Hale's anxiety was now intertwined with the outcome of a mission he had little control over. In the field, Arya moved like a shadow across the jagged cliffs and turbulent waters. The ambush was relentless, but her calm was unshakable. She led her team with efficiency, taking calculated risks, neutralizing threats and advancing toward the submarine's last known location. Each movement was precise, each command measured. Despite the chaos, her focus never wavered. She found the submarine in a partially submerged cove, surrounded by enemy patrols and detection devices. Her team assessed the situation in seconds, communicating silently with gestures honed through years of training. Arya calculated extraction points, potential ambush zones, and enemy patrol patterns. She instructed her team with exacting brevity, leaving no room for doubt. The SEALs moved in synchronized silence, disabling surveillance devices and neutralizing hostiles without firing a shot unnecessarily. Back in the war room, Hale could only watch helplessly as the monitors showed intermittent feeds. Every lost signal, every static-laden image twisted the knife of anxiety in his chest. He wanted to intervene to take control, but he understood that in this arena he had no power. The operation was beyond conventional command. The fate of the crew and the lives of Arya and her team rested entirely on her skill, judgment, and precision. Hours later, the first sign of progress appeared. The team had secured the submarine's crew. Hale exhaled, a mixture of relief and continued tension washing over him. But the danger was far from over. Enemy forces were closing in, reinforcements approaching from multiple vectors. Arya assessed the situation instantly, calculating the risks and benefits of every potential extraction route. She chose the most dangerous yet fastest path, a narrow corridor through treacherous reefs and rocky outcrops. The SEALs moved with uncanny precision, neutralizing threats, securing the crew, and advancing toward extraction points. Each member of the team relied on Arya's decisions, their trust absolute. She navigated them through near-impossible terrain, always aware of the slightest environmental shift or enemy movement. Hale could only imagine the mental load she carried. The lives of her team, the crew, the success of the mission, all balanced on her steady, calculating hands. Finally, as dusk fell over the Pacific, extraction helicopters appeared on the horizon. Arya's team moved to secure the area, signaling the crew for evacuation. The operation was not yet complete, but the tide had shifted. Hale allowed himself a cautious optimism, though the tension in his chest did not abate entirely. He knew better than to underestimate her again. As the team boarded the helicopters, Hale reflected on the events of the day. He had watched one of the most dangerous operations of his career unfold, with lives hanging in the balance, and the outcome determined by a single operative. Arya Cross had led the mission with unparalleled skill, demonstrating every lesson of discipline, precision, and resilience that he had only begun to understand. That night, as Hale finally left the war room, the weight of his previous mistakes pressed upon him. He had struck her wrist in the war room, an act of frustration and misjudgment, yet she had survived, thrived, and led an impossible mission to success. She had demonstrated her mastery without arrogance, without complaint, and without acknowledgement. Hale understood, with stark clarity, that some of the most extraordinary individuals operated in silence, their capabilities invisible until action demanded them. He realized something crucial. Leadership was not just about commanding visible forces, but about recognizing, supporting, and trusting those who worked in shadows. Arya Cross embodied that lesson fully. She had reminded him, painfully, that even the most decorated admiral could be outmatched in skill, strategy, and composure. Hale's gaze lingered on the maps of the Pacific as he left. The mission was not over, but the first phase had succeeded thanks to one officer's unmatched capabilities, and he knew that the coming days would demand more of him, more of his judgment, and more of his humility. The story of Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross, the Navy SEAL he had almost underestimated, was only growing more complex, more dangerous, and more extraordinary with every passing moment. The night was thick over the Pacific, the air heavy with mist and the faint metallic scent of. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross crouched near the edge of the rocky outcrop, her team silent around her. The helicopter extraction was delayed. Enemy forces had unexpectedly mobilized, creating a corridor of danger that no ordinary team could have navigated. Arya assessed the terrain, every movement calculated, every decision critical. Her mind was a battlefield of probabilities, enemy patrols, shifting tides, unseen hazards, and the lives of her team and the rescued submarine crew. One misstep would be catastrophic. Her eyes scanned the shadows. The enemy was moving faster than anticipated, patrols slipping through the rocks like predators. Arya signaled to her team, a subtle gesture honed from years of silent communication. The SEALs responded instantly, shifting positions to provide cover and maintain a defensive perimeter. She whispered orders, precise and measured, as if the air itself carried her voice. Every word counted, every delay could cost lives. Far above, the war room was tense. Admiral Hale's eyes were glued to the monitors, but the feeds were intermittently blocked, scrambled by enemy interference. His stomach tightened with each report. He knew the stakes. The crew's lives, the success of the mission, and Arya's safety rested on actions he could neither influence nor predict. He was accustomed to command, to being in control, but here, he could only observe and trust the operative he had once struck. Back on the rocks, Arya made a critical decision. The extraction point was compromised. Enemy forces had advanced into a narrow pass, cutting off the original route. Without hesitation, she calculated an alternate path, a treacherous climb along unstable cliffs, with the tide threatening to sweep them into the ocean below. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was worse, capture or worse for the submarine crew. "Move," she whispered, her tone both command and reassurance. The SEALs followed, silently securing the path and neutralizing obstacles. Arya led the way, her body low and controlled, every step deliberate. Even the rescued crew instinctively followed her, trusting her judgment in a situation where fear could have paralyzed them. Her training, experience, and instinct meshed seamlessly, guiding them through a landscape designed to kill. Hale's anxiety in the war room escalated. His hands clenched around the console, knuckles white, as he monitored the limited updates trickling through. He knew the terrain, the enemy positions, and the hazards, but he had no idea how Arya was maneuvering through them. She operated in a realm beyond conventional strategy, relying on instinct, training, and split-second decisions. Hale's pride battled with humility. He had once underestimated her, and now he had no choice but to trust her. A sudden flare of motion on one of the monitors caught Hale's eye. Enemy patrols were closing in faster than predicted, threatening to intercept the team. He called for updates, for contingency plans, but received nothing beyond encrypted confirmations. He realized the truth. The operation was entirely in Arya's hands. No reinforcement could arrive in time. No additional orders would matter. The outcome depended solely on her skill, judgment, and composure. Back in the field, Arya's team faced their first direct confrontation. Enemy operatives attempted to block the path, armed and ready. Without hesitation, Arya signaled her team. They moved with silent precision, neutralizing threats with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. The clash was over in seconds, the enemy incapacitated, and not a single civilian or team member harmed. The rescued crew stared in awe, realizing that the woman leading them was unlike anyone they had ever encountered. Hale exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. He knew the danger was far from over. The team still had to reach the extraction point, navigate the cliffs, and evade further enemy detection. Every second counted, every movement could alter the outcome. Yet he also felt a grudging respect, a realization that Arya's skill and judgment were beyond anything he had ever observed in his career. She was operating in silence, invisibly shaping the fate of dozens of lives, and he could do nothing but watch. Arya moved with calm determination. The cliffs were treacherous, jagged rocks jutting out at dangerous angles, waves crashing below. She led her team along narrow ledges, balancing risk with the necessity of speed. Every step required precision. A single misstep could result in death. Yet she remained composed, her eyes scanning for threats, her mind calculating variables at a pace no one else could match. Hale's phone buzzed with encrypted messages. Each update brought partial information. The team had cleared one ambush, neutralized surveillance, and secured a safer path. Yet the tension did not ease. The environment was unpredictable, the enemy adaptable, and Arya's plan required flawless execution. Hale found himself packing, whispering prayers under his breath, realizing that this was a type of leadership and courage he could observe but not replicate. The helicopter extraction finally appeared, a dark silhouette against the fading twilight. But the enemy had anticipated their route, and another group of operatives blocked the landing zone. Arya assessed the situation in a heartbeat, calculating angles of attack, timing, and risk. "Cover fire," she whispered, her team moving into position. Using silent, precise tactics, they neutralized the immediate threats and cleared the landing area without unnecessary exposure. Hale's breath caught as he saw the team approach the helicopters. Every step had been a gamble, every decision a potential disaster. And yet, Arya's leadership had brought them to this point, intact and ready for extraction. He felt an overwhelming mix of relief, awe, and admiration. He had underestimated her once, never again. As the rescued submarine crew boarded the helicopters, Arya gave final instructions, ensuring the team's safety and the mission's success. She remained calm, composed, and efficient, a pillar of skill and discipline in the midst of chaos. Hale observed from the war room, realizing that she had achieved something extraordinary. She had led a mission no one else could have survived, and she had done so with precision, courage, and unwavering focus. Once the helicopters lifted off, Hale allowed himself a long, steady exhale. The operation had succeeded beyond expectations. Lives had been saved, the submarine crew extracted, and Arya Cross had demonstrated the full extent of her capabilities. Hale knew that this mission would be studied, analyzed, and classified for years, but the human element, the skill and leadership of one extraordinary officer, would remain unparalleled. Hale sat back in his chair, the adrenaline ebbing slowly from his system. He reflected on the week, the war room incident, the silent observation, the Pentagon corridors, and now this mission. He realized that leadership was as much about humility as authority, about recognizing extraordinary talent, and about trusting those who operate in shadows. Arya Cross had taught him a lesson he would never forget. The war room lights dimmed slightly as staff began to depart, leaving Hale alone with the quiet hum of monitors. He stared at the Pacific map, now peaceful, yet knowing the danger was never truly over. Arya's skill had carried the mission, but the world remained unpredictable, and new challenges would inevitably arise. He understood, finally, that her presence was a constant reminder of the extraordinary individuals who operate in silence, unseen, and often unacknowledged, until action demands otherwise. As Hale left the war room that night, he thought of her, the Navy SEAL he had once struck, the officer who had silently judged him, and the operative who had just executed a mission that no one else could have survived. He realized that she was more than a soldier. She was a force, a lesson, and a symbol of precision, discipline, and courage under fire. And he knew, deep in his chest, that the story of Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross was far from over. The helicopter touched down in the late hours of the evening, blades slicing the night air as the sea breeze swept across the landing zone. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross led her team off the aircraft with the same calm precision she had displayed throughout the mission. Every step was controlled, deliberate, and unhurried, yet each movement radiated authority and skill. The rescued submarine crew followed behind, exhausted but unharmed, their eyes wide with disbelief at the efficiency of their savior. Admiral Hale was waiting near the command post, packing in nervous anticipation. For hours, he had monitored intermittent updates, his mind a mix of worry, admiration, and lingering guilt. He had once struck her in the war room, and now he was about to witness her in person after she had accomplished what no one else could. His chest tightened as he prepared to confront the reality of her unmatched capabilities. Arya approached Hale, her gaze steady and composed. She did not rush, did not demand attention, and yet her presence filled the space. Hale noticed every detail, the subtle tension in her posture, the calm in her eyes, the aura of disciplined authority that required no declaration. She exuded confidence not through words but through sheer competence, a silent force that demanded recognition. "Admiral Hale," she said quietly, nodding in acknowledgement. Her voice was measured, precise, yet carried an unspoken weight of authority. Hale felt a jolt of humility. He realized fully now that she operated on a level he could neither command nor match. "Lieutenant Commander Cross," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt, "welcome back. I owe you an apology." He hesitated, recalling the moment in the war room when frustration had caused him to act impulsively. "I acted recklessly before. I underestimated you and I should have known better." Arya's eyes softened just slightly, but her expression remained controlled. "Admiral, your concern for the mission is understood. No apology is necessary. We focus on results, not the past." Her words were calm, almost dismissive, yet carried an undeniable sense of professionalism. Hale felt the weight of her discipline and the reminder that she operated beyond petty grievances or ego. He motioned for her to follow him to a quieter area. As they walked, Hale's mind raced. He had seen the mission unfold from the war room, observed her leading the team through ambushes, environmental hazards, and enemy fire, and he was still overwhelmed by the scale of her skill. Now, seeing her in person after those feats, he realized just how extraordinary she truly was. "Your actions today, the way you handled the ambush, the extraction, everything," Hale began, struggling for words. "I've never witnessed anything like it. You saved lives, completed an impossible mission, and did so flawlessly." Arya's expression remained neutral. "We completed the mission, Admiral. That is our objective. Lives are preserved, operations succeed. The rest is observation." She paused as though weighing whether to add more, then continued. "The world operates in shadows. You command what is visible, we operate in what is unseen. Both are necessary. Hale nodded slowly, understanding her meaning. The war room, the commands, the visible operations. He had authority there. But Arya existed in a different realm, a space where precision, discipline, and silence determined outcomes. She had reminded him that leadership was multifaceted, that power existed both in the seen and the unseen, and that true skill often went unacknowledged until it was needed. Suddenly, an urgent alert cut through the quiet. The submarine crew had detected potential enemy reinforcements approaching the area. Hale's stomach tightened. The mission was technically complete, yet the danger was far from over. Arya's eyes sharpened instantly. She assessed the threat, calculated response time, and issued instructions to her team with calm precision. "Deploy overwatch positions," she instructed quietly, pointing to strategic points around the landing zone. "Neutralize any hostiles before they can engage. Maintain stealth until extraction is fully secured." Her team moved silently, executing every command with military efficiency. Hale watched in awe as the situation, which could have escalated into chaos, was neutralized before he could even react. After the threat was eliminated, Arya returned to Hale's side. "The crew is secure, extraction is complete, no additional action required at this time." Her tone was simple, factual, and unyielding, a report, not a performance. Hale felt a profound mix of relief and respect. He realized then that he had been naive to think authority alone ensured control. In the field, competence, awareness, and rapid adaptability determined success. Arya Cross embodied those qualities fully. He had once been in command, confident in his knowledge, his hierarchy, his experience. Now, in the presence of someone whose skill and judgment exceeded his own in critical ways, he felt humbled. Hale led Arya to the war room, where senior staff awaited updates and debriefing. The submarine crew offered their gratitude, eyes wide as they recounted the seamless, silent guidance they had received. Hale observed silently, his admiration deepening. Here was a leader who inspired respect not through words or rank, but through action, precision, and calm authority. During the debrief, Hale watched her interact with intelligence officers, operational staff, and the submarine crew. She gave concise instructions, highlighted key observations, and noted potential threats with clarity that left everyone in awe. Yet she remained unassuming, never boasting, never exaggerating. The room recognized her skill, but it was subtle, almost intangible, a quiet dominance rooted in competence rather than ego. After the session, Hale requested a private moment with her. "Lieutenant Commander," he began, his voice measured, "I've spent my career leading, commanding, and making decisions in situations of risk. Today, I've learned that even the most experienced can be humbled by someone operating in silence. You've taught me a lesson I won't forget, that true leadership is not just visibility, but the ability to act decisively, quietly, and effectively in shadows." Arya's gaze met his, and for the first time there was a subtle acknowledgement of mutual respect. "Leadership is measured by outcomes, Admiral," she said. "Sometimes those outcomes are unseen, yet critical. Your role ensures what is visible remains stable. Mine ensures that what is hidden does not destroy it." Hale nodded, finally understanding. The war room, the chain of command, the visible operations, these were only one half of the equation. Arya and operatives like her ensured the unseen threats were neutralized before they ever emerged. She had operated in silence, neutralized a deadly threat, and preserved lives without fanfare or recognition. Hale realized the depth of the system he commanded, and the reliance he had on people like her. That night, as Hale walked back to his office, he reflected on the week's events. The war room incident, the corridors of the Pentagon, the mission itself, it had all led to this moment of clarity. Arya Cross was no ordinary officer. She was a force, a shadow operative whose precision, discipline, and lethal skill ensured the safety of countless lives, and he had almost failed to recognize it. He made a mental vow. He would never underestimate her again. Her skills, judgment, and composure had proven superior in the field, and her presence would remain a critical element of every future mission he oversaw. Hale understood, finally, that leadership required not only command but humility, awareness, and trust in those operating beyond the visible spectrum. As he left the war room, Hale glanced back once more at her empty seat. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross had returned victorious, unscathed, and quietly dominant. She had completed what no one else could, navigated danger with calm precision, and demonstrated the extraordinary depth of her capability. Hale understood that this was only the beginning. The real challenges, the tests of skill, courage, and judgment, were yet to come, and he would now face them with a new understanding of what it truly meant to lead, follow, and respect the unseen. The war room was quiet, the screens dimmed, and the tension that had gripped it for days finally eased, but only slightly. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross sat at the far end of the table, reviewing final mission reports with meticulous precision. Her team hovered nearby, equally disciplined, ready to respond to any last-minute instructions. The rescued submarine crew had been debriefed and transported to safe locations, and the immediate threat neutralized. Yet, the air was thick with unspoken acknowledgement. Something extraordinary had just occurred. Admiral Hale entered quietly, his presence commanding but tempered by a newfound humility. He had spent the past week oscillating between anxiety, awe, and reflection. From the moment he struck Arya in the war room to witnessing her lead a mission no one else could survive, he had been forced to confront his own assumptions about leadership, authority, and skill. Now, seeing her here, composed, efficient, and unshaken, he understood the full scope of her capabilities. "Lieutenant Commander," Hale began, his voice steady but carrying weight, "I have spent my career in command positions, making decisions in crises and managing operations with precision. Today, however, I have learned something invaluable. Skill, judgment, and leadership sometimes exist where authority cannot reach. You have reminded me of that lesson." Arya looked up from her reports, her expression calm, professional, but subtly acknowledging the gravity of his words. "Admiral, the objective was clear. Lives were preserved, the mission completed. Leadership is measured in results, not recognition." Her words carried no arrogance, only the quiet authority of someone whose competence needed no validation. Hale nodded slowly, understanding fully. He had underestimated her once, and the cost of that misjudgment could have been catastrophic. He had witnessed her navigate ambushes, treacherous terrain, enemy forces, and environmental hazards with calm precision. She had orchestrated extraction under conditions that would have paralyzed most officers, all without visible recognition or complaint. Hale finally recognized that her effectiveness did not require affirmation. It existed independently, unshakable and absolute. The senior intelligence officer approached, discreetly presenting a classified document to Hale. He opened it carefully, revealing a detailed account of Arya's mission, her actions, and the operational challenges faced. Every tactical choice she had made, every contingency anticipated, every life preserved was meticulously recorded. Hale read through it slowly, absorbing the enormity of her accomplishment. The officer spoke quietly. "Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Cross's operations are often beyond the scope of conventional command. Her skill set is unparalleled. Today, she has demonstrated why." Hale leaned back in his chair, the reality of the past week settling over him. He thought back to the war room incident, to the moment he had struck her wrist in frustration. At the time, it had seemed minor, a momentary lapse in judgment. Now, after observing her in the field and seeing the depth of her skill, it struck him as a pivotal turning point. If she had reacted differently, if her judgment had faltered even slightly, the mission and countless lives could have been lost. He turned his gaze to her. "Lieutenant Commander Cross, I owe you more than recognition. I owe you respect, understanding, and the acknowledgement that your abilities surpass what I had ever considered. I have underestimated you, and I will not make that mistake again." Arya's expression softened just slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of mutual respect. She rose, standing tall yet unassuming, the embodiment of discipline and capability. "Thank you, Admiral. My duty is to the mission, to the team, and to those we serve. Recognition is secondary." Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. Hale felt it profoundly. The war room staff watched quietly, understanding the significance of the exchange. Here was a moment of unspoken acknowledgement, a bridge between authority and skill, command and execution. Hale, the seasoned admiral, had been humbled by the capabilities of one officer who operated beyond conventional understanding. Arya, the elite operative, had demonstrated that mastery could exist in silence, precision, and discipline. Hale reflected on the week's events: the ambush, the treacherous cliffs, the extraction under enemy fire, and her calm decisiveness throughout. He realized that leadership was not only about issuing commands or managing resources. It was also about recognizing those who could act decisively in shadows, beyond visibility and conventional oversight. Arya had this truth in every action, every decision, and every measured movement. The submarine crew, now safely secured and debriefed, had expressed gratitude in subdued tones. They understood that their survival and rescue had hinged on a combination of skill, discipline, and courage that exceeded any expectation. Yet Arya remained composed, treating their gratitude with quiet professionalism. To her, this was routine. Another mission, another operation, another set of lives saved without fanfare or self-congratulation. Hale realized that such operatives existed in a rarefied space, individuals whose impact was monumental yet often invisible. They operated without ego, without desire for recognition, and without reliance on hierarchical approval. Their skill, precision, and judgment shaped outcomes in ways most leaders could only observe from a distance. Arya Cross was the epitome of this principle. As Hale prepared to leave the war room, he paused to speak once more. "Lieutenant Commander, your actions have reminded me of something critical, that true authority is not always visible and true skill is not always acknowledged. You have changed the way I view leadership, risk, and trust. For that, I am grateful." Arya nodded slightly, acknowledging the sentiment without ceremony. "Leadership exists in many forms, Admiral. Some are visible, others operate in shadows. Both are necessary to ensure success and preserve lives." Her voice was calm, yet Hale felt the depth of its meaning reverberate through him. As he stepped away, Hale reflected on the week's events, the tension, the anxiety, the fear, and the awe he had felt. He understood now that his command relied not only on his decisions, but also on the competence and judgment of those like Arya, whose skill transcended traditional authority. He had learned humility, respect, and the value of trust in those who operated beyond the visible spectrum. Later that evening, Hale sat alone in his office, reviewing mission reports and operational analyses. He replayed the war room incident in his mind, recalling the strike, her silent observation, and the lessons it had imparted. He understood that leadership required more than rank, experience, or authority. It required the ability to recognize extraordinary talent, to trust in it, and to allow it to operate unhindered when lives depended upon it. Arya's presence had reshaped his understanding of command. She had operated flawlessly under extreme conditions, neutralized threats with precision, and preserved lives with calm decisiveness. Hale knew that her skills, judgment, and discipline would continue to shape missions long after this event. She had become, in his eyes, a symbol of silent mastery, an operative whose influence extended far beyond what could be commanded or seen. In the final analysis, Hale realized that respect and trust were earned in moments like these, not through ceremony, rank, or acknowledgement, but through action, precision, and the unwavering commitment to duty. Arya Cross had earned his deepest respect, his full trust, and a place in his understanding of leadership that no incident could erase. As Hale looked at the now empty war room, he smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and admiration washing over him. The mission was complete, the submarine crew safe, and the lessons learned were indelible. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross had proven herself beyond doubt, a Navy SEAL whose skill, judgment, and discipline operated beyond visibility, beyond recognition, and beyond authority. And Hale understood, finally, that some of the most extraordinary forces in the world operated quietly, unseen, and with lethal precision. The story of the mission, the war room incident, and the extraordinary operative who had executed it would remain classified, known only to a select few. Yet for Hale, the lesson was personal and permanent. Underestimate the unseen at your peril, trust in extraordinary skill when it presents itself, and never forget that true leadership exists in both shadows and light. Lieutenant Commander Arya Cross had walked through fire, ambush, and danger with composure unmatched. She had operated in silence, demonstrated precision beyond expectation, and preserved lives when the outcome hung by a thread. And in doing so, she had changed the way Admiral Jonathan Hale viewed authority, trust, and the measure of true leadership. In the end, Hale realized that respect was not given, it was earned in action. And Arya Cross had earned it irrevocably forever.